you see the real difference between the teleprompter speech that he read, and he tends to be flatter on a teleprompter than he is when he can go off the cuff.
Sure.
But it was a fairly typical, I think, Republican presidential speech, laying out priorities that are in line with the Republican Party. And I thought the whole process inside the Capitol was actually quite dignified. I think it looked like many other inaugurations, except that it was inside, and all the other presidents were sitting there that are alive. Not all of their spouses came, as we can talk about, but nonetheless, if the world's watching about the transition of power, I think that yesterday was a showcase of the transition of power. The other speech he gave and the other sort of ongoings in the Capitol Arena, that was sort of like a campaign rally and a celebration. And, we can discuss that. But the ceremony, I think, was in line with prior ceremonies, and the agenda, strengthen the economy, reduce inflation. The agenda has some parts, I think, of former presidential agendas from the Republican Party.
Wendy, as it relates to some of these executive orders around immigration deportation, how are you thinking about that? How practical are some of the more robust plans from President Trump?
Well, the person who's in charge, Holman, said, we're going to start with what we can do. And what we can do is people who have been arrested, there's a record of that. And if they're undocumented, they can match that. And that's who they're going to try to deport first. Depending on their success rate there.
Right.
And he said specifically, President Trump, on gangs, if they can get enough done there, they may back off raiding factories, for example. Because, of course, if you remove workers from their workforce who are undocumented,
Right.
you have to replace them. And that means higher wages and inflation.
Wendy,
So it's a hard thing to pull off.
Wendy, last night in Vermont, above Cabot Creamery, where they make all that wonderful cheese, on the distance between Derby and Newport, way, way up. They almost speak French up there. A Border Patrol guy was murdered on the highway. They showed the video in the middle of nowhere. Is there any other issue in America except the linkage of crime to immigration? Is that the singular issue for this president?
Well, not only, I don't know if it's a singular issue, but certainly even for Congress, right? So the Congress just passed the immigration bill, Lincoln Riley bill, that's named after a woman who was murdered by someone who was undocumented, who had been arrested and released. So, this was something in the first Trump administration, too. So I feel like this is a really important connection for the Republicans to make. We know that the vast majority of immigrants in the country are law-abiding people, and the vast majority of undocumented are law-abiding people. But nonetheless, we have these horrible incidents, and that is the fodder and the energy that they are using to close the border. And you can argue this is a time when the trifecta of Republicans can pass immigration reform. Pass immigration reform. Get tough on the border for people who are not documented, but expand the number of visas for people who want to come here in the documented process. And that's what the big debate will be. But there isn't any excuse for the Republican Party now. It's a trifecta. They can do immigration reform.